and many other things. And speaking of being a parent, if you have your own business, you work all of those years, and ultimately you want to pass on everything you've earned to your children. It's your life's work. And a lot of parents work hard to build that business in the hopes that one day it will be a great benefit for the kids, a great advantage for their kids. But a lot of people find themselves in a situation where they don't properly prepare for the financial repercussions if the child's marriage ends in divorce. Joining us to talk about this is Rick Peticca. He is an associate at Shulman Law Firm. Hi, Rick. Thanks a lot for doing this.
Hi, Barb. How are you?
I'm good, thank you. Yes, of course. We're so happy to have you. So give me one or two typical scenarios that you would run into at your law firm where people are affected by this type of thing.
Yeah, so in my experience here at Shulman Law Firm, we've had experiences where there's been a family business. It's either created by the parents or it's been handed down through grandparents, and eventually there's a plan to have that business succeed in subsequent generations. So the question is, what happens, and especially in this day and age where there's approximately a 40% divorce rate, what happens if the business gets transferred eventually and that child goes through a divorce? What happens? And do you have a proper plan in place to protect that eventuality? So this is where we have created what we call the Shulman Family Inheritance Protection Plan.
We're going to get to that, but I want to ask you, in your experience, are most people with their own businesses properly prepared for this possibility?
Not at all, and it's just something that they don't turn their mind to. At least not early on, or when they do, the question is it too late to put a plan in place? For example, this is where one of the tips that we promote is to have that communication start when the child is young, to have that communication hopefully before they start dating. And the reason why, Barb, is obvious is if they've already started going out and they're dating and it's getting pretty serious, it's going to be kind of hard to approach that subject to say, oh, by the way, my parents plan on leaving me the business one day. They'd like you to sign this contract. And then you start getting feelings of awkwardness, or is it feelings of mistrust and what they think that I'm out to get you and things like that. And I've actually had cases or seen cases where people were dating or going out for 3 to 4 years, and then after the marriage proposal came up and the idea of having a prenup done at that time to protect the family business was brought up, the marriage was called off. So it does create feelings of awkwardness, and the whole point is you want to kind of nip it in the bud, as they say, and to have that frank discussion early in advance.
Yeah, you know what, Rick, I love this idea because I think that if you have a family business and your kids are growing up, my approach as a parent with a lot of things is that it's never one talk, one discussion. It's a series of conversations. It's ongoing and changes focus through the years depending on what you're talking about. But this one to me would be a no-brainer. You have a family business. As your kids are growing older and they ask the inevitable questions about how does dad make his money, how does mom make her money, and what do you guys do for a living, then it enters that conversation as, and oh, by the way, when you get married, this is what you have to do, and it's in order. So they don't have, it's not tied to the person they are with when they're about to get married. It's tied to, this is what we do because we have a family business.
That's correct. That's correct. And usually I think there's always an unspoken expectation. Someone, the person coming in or dating the person with the family business or behind it is, well, if I'm here long enough, is there something in it for me as well? I mean, it's an unspoken expectation, I would say.
Well, what about the situation, and I've seen a lot of this, where somebody gets married to their spouse who ends up being a part of the company and working for the in-laws? That must complicate the whole situation too, would it not?
Well, it does, and the question is, do they become an employee, or were they paid as per other employment standards? Were they treated differently? And if they were treated differently, it raises a host of questions. Were they treated differently because they were considered some sort of an owner, and that's why they were given special treatment? So it kind of opens up a can of worms that if it's not properly spelled out early on a separation, it could lead to significant litigation or problems.
You know, we have to take a break, and I'm going to see if you can stick around for a bit, but I just want to ask you quickly before we go to break, is that something that's also worth figuring out with lawyers? If you're going to have an in-law enter into the family business, are there ways you can set that up as well?
There are, and you can set it up through, obviously, when they're marrying into the family, through a marriage contract, and subsequent, if they're going to be working for the company, you can also have employment agreements to set out or limit their role.
Okay, this is interesting stuff. So we're talking to Rick Peticca, and if you have a question for him, you can give us a call. He's going to stick around for a few more minutes, 416-872-1010. Text us at 71010. We're talking about how you can protect your life's work, your family business, from your child's prospective spouse. Not to say that the prospective spouse is going to try to steal your money, but you've got your child who's going to eventually one day get married, probably, and you want to make sure that down the road, in the case that your child ends up getting divorced, things are set up properly so that the spouse doesn't unfairly get a portion of the money that you have spent your life earning to pass on to your kids. If you have any question around this kind of topic, 416-872-1010, text us at 71010. Coming up in the news, what is the worst reply all email you've ever sent? Probably not as bad as what one counselor sent today. That in 15 minutes. It's 8:45. Welcome back to the show. After 9 o'clock, Gary Dierenfeld joins us. He is our friendly social worker. He is a great friend of the Nightside, and he wrote a terrific column about parenting teens and how you have to turn from being their boss to being their consultant. We'll talk about that after 9 o'clock. But right now, Rick Peticca is on the line. He is with the Shulman law firm. And we're talking about the elephant in the room, how parents protect their life's work from their child's prospective spouse. If you have any questions around this kind of thing, because a lot of it has to do with setting up agreements ahead of time, getting your children used to the idea of a prenup before they're even in relationships, just so they know it's nothing against their future spouse. It's more about what we have to do to protect the family business. 416-872-1010. Text us at 71010. So, Rick, you were saying earlier that your law firm has created what's called an inheritance protection plan. How does that work?
Well, it's a protection plan that's in place. That is, when parents who have small businesses and they're wishing that their child get a prenup before they get married, we factor in the family business in designing the prenup at the time of when we're negotiating the contract. I'm
looking through it right now, and I'm seeing a lot of, pretty much just useful information, when you should talk to your kids, what kind of things you should talk to them about, the repercussions of not being fully prepared if you do have a family business. How many businesses would you estimate are family businesses, and how many people need to worry about this?
Well, based on the stats that we were able to find, approximately 98% of employer businesses in Canada are small businesses, and surprisingly, 80% of those businesses are family-owned.
Wow.
So, really, that basically sends the message that these small businesses are the financial engine of this country. So, it's nothing to balk at.
Have you seen any situations, I know you've mentioned that there are many, many people who own family businesses who are not properly set up for this. Have you seen situations where a child's ex-spouse does get a chunk of the family money?
I have, and it happens more often than not, Barb. A lot of the poor planning comes, everyone thinks of succession planning as what happens when I die. And that's when, when you're doing will and doing estate planning. But less planning is done. What happens when everyone's still alive and the parent wants to retire? And that, like I said, opens up a can of worms if the prospective spouse eventually starts working for the family business, or indirectly they integrate their finances that impacts that business. It could potentially open up some issues.
Is it ever a bad thing? Do you ever see a son-in-law or a daughter-in-law start working for a family company when they really have no business working for the family company? Does that make sense?
More oftentimes than not, the way it happens, Barb, is if kids start coming into the picture and just really out of convenience, that a son-in-law or daughter-in-law will give up their career or not pursue it. And really, it's because they're kind of belonging to the family. They're starting to participate more with the family business, if not outright, but indirectly. So it happens in that way. There, it's really circumstantial.
Okay, so you know what? Your law firm, Shulman Law Firm, Rick Peticca is my guest. Shulman Law Firm has some planning tips to make sure that you keep the wealth in your family if you are running a family business. So why don't we go through them, starting with the communication part?
That's right, and the first thing is communication is key, and it's important that parents early on speak with their children the reasons why they want to protect the family business. And it could, aside from the hard work, it could mean that it was passed down through previous generation, and something that there's a vision to have it continue on in subsequent generations, or have that vision continue. So parents need to reach out to their kids early on before they start dating and explain the reasons why they feel it's important to have the proper planning in place.
Okay, and the other thing is, and we talked about this, but I think this is so key, is talking to your kids about prenups before they're even at the stage where they're dating people, never mind getting engaged.
That's right, because the quote-unquote leverage to have somebody sign an agreement is usually before things happen. Once people have started living together, or if they've already married, then you don't have that leverage anymore. I mean, theoretically, it is possible to sign a marriage contract after marriage, but the leverage isn't there as it would be when it's before. So.
Okay, so also appoint a successor or establish a process for selecting a successor for your business.
That's right. So it's basically having a succession appointment plan in place. How do future shareholders become part of the family business, and having a detailed plan as to how the business will succeed.
You know, it's interesting, Rick. I would think that there are probably some people listening who have family businesses who never thought about going to a family law firm in order to deal with this. You know, I can imagine people thinking, oh, it wouldn't be a family law firm because they deal in divorce and family situations. But this really is that because it's a family business.
That's right. That's right. And as I mentioned the point earlier, Barb, a lot of the planning is done mostly what happens when people die, what happens to my assets at that point. But we found that very, very few people turn their minds to what happens to the planning before death, when everyone is still alive, and it could be through retirement. It doesn't have to happen through death, where the parent just retires and says, look, I can't carry on with the business. I need to kind of pass the baton, and how do we deal with it?
Yeah, and I would think, especially if you have more than one child involved in the family business and then spouses become involved, that could end up just being a minefield.
For sure, for obvious reasons. If you have more than one child, and you have more than one in-law, whether son-in-law, daughter-in-law, and if there aren't any problems there, How do you deal with it?
Yeah, I mean, I've seen, I'm sure we all have, families really fall apart over things like that. So-and-so doesn't talk to that person for years, if ever, and it all goes back to the family business and playing favorites and all that kind of stuff. So probably best to set it up so that you really are bulletproof in that way.
That's correct. That's ultimately what it is. This isn't about not trusting people or anything like that. It's really like setting up an insurance policy to deal with the eventuality if something were to go wrong. I mean, people buy medical insurance when they travel, and it's really not that they plan on getting sick. It's what happens if something happens. This is no different.
Great point. Rick Peticca, thanks so much for this. Hopefully you'll join us again sometime.
I'd be happy to. Thank you, Barbara, for having me on your show.
Thank you. Our pleasure. Rick Peticca, associate at Shulman Law Firm, and they have the inheritance protection plan. If you have a family business, it's something worth thinking about, worth looking into. Let me read a couple of text messages. Someone writes in, a clever rich guy bought a house and rented it to his son. They told the wife it was a gift. Years later, when things fell apart, she found out the matrimonial home was not available for equity. The father-in-law evicted them both and rented the house back to his son after a few months. I get it. This person says brilliant. But I mean, the whole thing was based on a lie and tricking the person. Someone else says, don't say my name. No, I won't. But I knew a very successful business where the son-in-law is the lead sales guy, and she had an affair on his wife, the daughter of the president, and he is still the sales manager, even though the daughter and him are divorced because he was that good at his job. Thank you. And they say, I love your show. Thank you so much. When we come back, Gary Dierenfeld, social worker, interesting stuff. You know this is true if